"I'll pay you $1 million if you can read this," Graham Moreland said, holding the ivory letter above Caroline Pierce's serving tray, as 300 guests waited for her to fail. One man whispered that the banquet server looked terrified. Caroline was not. She was angry. She took the page. The Latin was formal. Caroline read it aloud, then translated. "Power that forgets humanity eventually becomes consumed by its own shadow." The laughter vanished. Graham's expression changed when she handed the letter back. "The money is yours." "I don't want it." Then Caroline tilted the paper toward the chandelier. Faint grooves crossed beneath Thomas Moreland's handwriting, parallel pressure marks from another sheet once lying above it. Near the margin sat a compressed correction mark Daniel Pierce had used when teaching her Latin as a child. Her breath caught. Marianne Holt saw it too. A security guard moved toward Caroline. Graham blocked him with a glance. "Don't touch the letter." For the first time, Caroline looked at him without contempt. "What did you see?" he asked. "If I tell you, this stops being your family secret." Graham answered, "Then it becomes ours." Across the ballroom, another guard touched his earpiece. One by one, the exit doors locked. 7 hours earlier, Caroline had still believed this was only another ordinary shift. By 4 that afternoon, Caroline had corrected 27 Latin quizzes and caught the same mistranslated verb 3 students had copied from the school's outdated textbook. She circled the line in red, wrote the proper construction beneath it, and added a note for Monday's lesson. Teaching at Rainier Heights High had never made her rich, but it gave her something she trusted, work that mattered, because she knew how to do it well. Her provisional contract, however, ended in June, and the district still had not decided whether to make her position permanent. Jesse Park leaned against the classroom door. "Tell me you're going home." "I'm changing clothes and working the Harbor Crown banquet." "You taught all day. Rent also works all month." Jesse had offered to cover groceries twice that month. Caroline had refused both times without discussion. Jesse sighed, then noticed the ivory envelope half hidden beneath Caroline's gradebook. Daniel Pierce's name was still faintly visible in one corner. Caroline slid it into her desk drawer before the familiar ache could become a conversation. At the tower, the event supervisor handed her a stack of commemorative place cards and waved away Caroline's concern about the Latin motto printed beneath Thomas Moreland's portrait. "You're serving wine, not editing copy." Caroline read the phrase again. "Then someone should tell your executive team this translation says obedience, not responsibility." The supervisor stopped. 5 minutes later, a panicked coordinator compared Caroline's correction with the original program notes. The cards were pulled before guests entered, and replacements began printing downstairs. Caroline tied back her dark hair, smoothed the black uniform over her full figure, and told herself the Moreland name meant nothing tonight. She had accepted the shift for money, not answers. Then the supervisor returned, suddenly much more polite. "Mr. Moreland heard about the translation issue." Caroline's fingers tightened around her serving tray. "He asked that Caroline Pierce, the Latin teacher who corrected the program, remain assigned near the main stage." She stared toward the ballroom doors. Graham Moreland had not met her yet, but somehow the Mafia boss already knew exactly who she was. "You knew I taught Latin before you challenged me," Caroline said, holding Graham's ivory letter between them like evidence. The locked ballroom had emptied into uneasy clusters after security reopened the doors. Graham led her into a small reception room beside the stage, but Caroline refused the chair he offered. "I knew you corrected the program," he said. "I did not know you would recognize anything in that letter." She turned the page sideways beneath the lamp. "These aren't age creases. Look." Her fingertip followed faint grooves running beneath Thomas Moreland's handwriting. Another sheet was lying over this one when someone wrote on it. The pressure carried through. Graham leaned closer, then stopped before crossing the distance she had already taught him to notice. Caroline pointed to a tiny compressed mark near the margin. My father used that abbreviation when he taught me Latin. Daniel Pierce. Something in Graham's face hardened. Your father met mine repeatedly during the Tacoma contamination dispute. Caroline's pulse stumbled, but she kept her voice level. Daniel investigated Moreland operations before he died. She did not mention the old ivory envelope locked in her desk. Graham did not mention how many of his waterfront records could connect legitimate Moreland business to criminal enforcement. His phone vibrated. He read the message once. Marianne ordered the oldest archive collection transferred to controlled storage. 36 hours. So, we have a deadline. And an access problem. My condition comes first. He waited. Shared evidence. No taking documents from me. No decisions about my safety without telling me. And you do not investigate my private life behind my back. For the first time that evening, Graham did not negotiate. Agreed. Jessie called before Caroline could answer. Her apartment door had been forced. Drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor. Laptop? Caroline asked. Still there. Cash. Untouched. Jewelry, too. Graham heard enough to understand. Someone had searched Caroline's home for something specific. She looked straight at him. If you investigate me behind my back, we're finished. I said agreed. Then Jessie sent another photograph. Daniel Pierce's papers had been disturbed deliberately. Don't crowd me, Caroline said when Graham leaned over the archive table, and the man who commanded half Seattle's waterfront actually stepped back. Graham searched by names, accounts, and security authorizations. Caroline ignored his system. You're looking for people, she said. I usually find problems that way. I'm looking for mistakes people forgot they made. She opened visitor logs, compared ink colors, filing dates, marginal notes, and handwritten corrections. She stopped on a page Graham had skimmed twice. Daniel Pierce's signature appeared beside a request for an independent environmental assessment. The date was 8 days after his official death. Graham stared at it. Forgery. Maybe, but not a lazy one. Caroline placed an old sample of Daniel's handwriting beside the log. He compressed his capital P when he wrote quickly. Same angle here, same break in the final stroke, and this abbreviation beside the date. He used it when a source had been independently confirmed. Graham looked from the paper to her. You can tell all that from handwriting. I teach dead languages to teenagers. Tiny differences are the job. He smiled. Caroline disliked noticing how much it changed his face. He changed tactics immediately. Instead of ordering security to pull every file containing Daniel's name, Graham told them to bring anything filed within 10 days of the signature. Her method became the investigation. He had not praised her. He had simply changed course because she was right. Hours later, they carried the records upstairs. When he leaned over her shoulder again, Caroline glanced sideways. He stopped before she spoke and moved to the opposite side of the desk. That rule applies even when I'm reading upside down, especially then. His laugh was quiet. Dinner arrived in expensive silver containers. Caroline looked at them once. No. Graham blinked. No. If we're eating while we work, I choose. They sat beside corporate records, eating noodles from cardboard cartons Caroline had ordered near her school. Graham loosened his tie. My father would have hated this. The noodles. The cartons on his desk, she smiled. You still arrange your life around a dead man's preferences. The humor left his face. That obvious. To a teacher, yes. After a silence, he admitted that every victory had been measured against Thomas. Success never felt entirely his. Failure always felt like proof that everyone had been right to doubt him. Caroline lowered her chopsticks. "I came back to Seattle because I never believed Daniel's death made sense," she said. "I told people I wanted closure. Really. I wanted proof my instincts weren't grief pretending to be logic." Graham did not reassure her cheaply. Instead, he slid a sealed internal memorandum across the desk. "If this contains what I think it does, it could implicate my father. You're giving me that. I'm giving you the chance to prove me wrong." Before Caroline answered, Graham's security chief entered with a tablet. "Access logs show Miss Pierce opened the visitor file before tonight." Caroline went still. Graham did not look at her. "Verify the original chain. Sir, before you accuse her." 10 minutes later, the chief returned. The record had been scanned 11 years earlier. Caroline could not have planted it. Graham turned the tablet around. "Her access remains unrestricted." Publicly, he had chosen evidence over instinct. The chief left. Graham checked the hour. "I'll take you home." Caroline looked at Daniel's impossible signature, at the memorandum Graham had trusted her to open, then at the man waiting for her answer, instead of deciding it. She pushed the cartons aside. "Order dinner again tomorrow," she said. "Tonight we keep going." Graham had just asked permission to take Caroline's shaking hand when Dr. Alan Reeves looked at her and said, "Your father survived the crash." For several seconds, Caroline heard only the ticking clock above the retired doctor's kitchen door. "No," she said. Alan's eyes filled with something too old to be surprise. "Daniel survived. Thomas learned someone inside Moreland Maritime had authorized a plan to silence him. He brought your father to me after the crash and asked me to make the world believe Daniel had died." Caroline pulled her hand from the table, not from Graham. "You let me bury him. I helped keep you alive. That is not the same thing." Graham said nothing. His silence felt different now. Not absence, but restraint. Alan opened a thin folder. Inside were copies of old payments made to private security contractors months after Daniel's supposed death. Caroline stared at the dates. They kept watching. "Yes. Then whoever searched my apartment wasn't looking for pollution files." Her voice steadied as the teacher in her took over. "They were looking for something connected to him." Alan nodded. "Daniel kept the original environmental assessment. Thomas believed it was the only document Marianne Holt could never safely rewrite." Graham went still. "Marianne. Her network," Alan said. "Thomas discovered it too late." Two earlier details snapped together in Caroline's mind. The untouched valuables in her apartment, and Daniel's impossible signature in the archive. Her father had not vanished into history. Someone had been hunting him through it. Alan looked toward Graham. "You'll need to decide what happens next." Graham turned immediately to Caroline. "She decides." The words landed harder than praise. Caroline asked where Daniel had gone, what contact method he used, and which accounts had continued receiving monitoring payments. Alan answered what he could. By the time they stood to leave, the mission had changed completely. Outside, Graham stopped beside the car. "You can walk away now," he said. "I'll keep searching." Caroline looked at him. "Without me, if that is what you choose." Fear tightened her chest, but so did something warmer. He was giving her the exit she had demanded. She stayed. When Graham lifted a hand, he paused. "May I?" Caroline placed her fingers in his. The kiss that followed was quiet, deliberate, and entirely chosen. Then Graham's phone lit. Every Moreland credential he possessed had been revoked, without warning or appeal. Caroline found the surveillance photograph of herself inside the file. Graham had promised never to build. The image showed her leaving Rainier Heights High with a canvas tote pressed against her hip, unaware that a camera had followed her across the parking lot. Beneath it sat 3 more photographs, then a typed schedule of her apartment, classroom, and usual route home. Her stomach turned. Graham reached for the file. "Caroline, did you order this?" He did not lie. "After my credentials were revoked, I had security watch the school and your building. You promised me. The threat changed, so you changed my answer for me." His silence was worse than an excuse. Graham stepped closer, then stopped himself. "I was trying to keep you alive." Caroline heard Alan's voice from hours earlier. "I helped keep you alive." The same defense, the same permission nobody had asked her to give. "You were supposed to be different." Pain moved across Graham's face, but fear hardened him again. "Marianne has access to people I no longer control. I arranged a secure apartment. You would have had privacy. You arranged where I would live. For a few days." Caroline laughed once without humor. "You still don't understand." Her phone buzzed. An anonymous message contained a second folder. Invoices, security authorizations, and more photographs. Marianne had known exactly where to cut. Caroline took the copied evidence drive from Graham's desk. "Leave that here." Her eyes lifted. Graham closed his mouth. The old command had escaped before the new man could stop it. "I'm taking my copy," Caroline said. "You don't get to decide that either." She left before he could answer. At Jesse's apartment, Caroline spread the photographs across the kitchen table, beside the ivory letter. Her anger felt clean at first. Graham had broken the boundary. Leaving him felt like recovering something stolen. But Jesse refused to let that become the whole truth. "You were right to leave," she said. "You were wrong not to tell him what you planned to do next." Caroline looked away. "I don't owe him my movements. No. But partnership isn't surveillance, and it isn't disappearing either." That struck deeper. Caroline had intended to verify Daniel's old records alone, without telling anyone. Independence had become the same locked door she hated other people closing around her. Then Jesse picked up one photograph. "Wait!" The picture showed Caroline entering her apartment building beneath a timestamp printed in the lower corner. Jesse checked the message Graham had sent when he ordered the new security watch. Her expression changed. This photograph was taken 2 days earlier. Caroline's anger did not disappear. It became something colder. Graham had violated her trust. But someone else had been watching her first, and whoever had sent the file wanted her to believe every camera belonged to Graham. Caroline turned the photograph over, studying the security code Jesse had almost missed. It matched neither Graham's recent authorization nor the school system. Marianne had access to another channel. Graham arrived without guards, without excuses, and placed the only master evidence drive in Caroline's hands. He did not ask to come inside Jesse's apartment. He waited in the hallway until Caroline stepped out and faced him. "I broke the rule," he said, "not because you misunderstood me, not because the danger changed. I decided my fear mattered more than your choice." Caroline held the drive between them. "I left without telling you what I planned to verify," she said. "That was my mistake. I called it independence because that sounded better than admitting I was scared to trust you again." Graham nodded once. No defense, no bargain. "The surveillance is gone. The secure apartment is cancelled. If you want protection, you choose it. If you don't, I live with that." Caroline looked down at the drive. "And this, yours to decide." Together they wrote a new rule on a legal pad Jesse pushed across the kitchen table. No protection, no strategy, no evidence release, and no decision involving the other person without disclosure first. Either of them could say no. Graham proved it immediately. "Do you want to release everything we can verify?" Caroline met his eyes. "Yes." Elliot Grant authenticated the files and distributed them through protected legal and journalistic channels. By afternoon, investigators secured the Tacoma site. Preservation orders froze records. Victims' attorneys obtained access. And Marianne Holt was suspended. Reporters credited Caroline's document work by name. For the first time since the rupture, relief entered the room. Then Elliot stopped scrolling. A dormant trust tied to Daniel Pierce had been accessed 12 minutes after publication. Caroline's relief vanished. Graham moved beside her but did not reach for the screen. The victory was real, but someone had used it to open a door they missed. Elliot stared at the timestamp. "She wasn't trying to stop us from publishing," he said. "She was waiting to see who answered." The timestamp that should have proved Marianne had lost instead showed she had been waiting for the scandal. Elliot enlarged the dormant trust record, while Caroline laid the surveillance photographs beside Daniel's disturbed papers. "Start with what we assumed," she said. Graham did not interrupt. They had assumed the apartment search targeted Moreland evidence, but cash, electronics, and documents had been ignored. Only Daniel's papers were disturbed. They had assumed surveillance payments were accounting debris. Yet those payments extended years beyond Daniel's staged death. The earliest warning had never demanded that they stop investigating contamination. It had demanded that Graham stop looking into the Pierce family. Caroline felt the pieces turn. She never needed to erase every file, she said. She needed to find him. Graham's expression tightened. "Daniel, if publication forced him to move, contact someone, access money. The trust lights up," Elliot finished. Caroline looked at Graham. Once he would have ordered guards and safe houses. Instead he asked, "What do you want to do?" Elliot's line flashed. The message contained no greeting, only a scanned page bearing Thomas Moreland's corrections and a phrase Caroline had not seen since childhood. Her father's authentication mark. Daniel was alive. He had the original environmental assessment. A second message followed. Marianne had called an emergency board and press proceeding at Harbor Crown Tower. Midnight. She intended to declare the leaked files stolen, Daniel unreliable, Graham compromised, and Caroline motivated. Graham said, "I can hide him." Caroline shook her head. "That only proves her argument." He waited. "We authenticate everything publicly. It puts you in the room with Marianne." "I know. And you choose it." "Yes." Graham nodded. "Then tell me the plan." The repaired rule held. By midnight, Caroline Wood returned to the tower where he had once tried to make her small. At 11:41 p.m., Graham placed his sealed syndicate ledgers in Caroline's hands and said, "If you use these, there is no Moreland organization left for me to return to." Caroline felt their weight before she understood it. Years of protected routes, illegal payments, political favors, security contracts, and names powerful men had assumed would never leave locked rooms. "Does your plan still need them?" Graham asked. Once, he would have decided the answer for her. "Yes," Caroline said. He nodded. "Then use them." 19 minutes remained. Before they entered, Caroline had given Graham every step of her plan. When he offered to take the risk alone, she refused. No secret martyrdom. If this costs us, we choose the cost together. Caroline entered Harbor Crown Tower through the service corridor, in the same black banquet uniform Marianne had once treated as proof of insignificance. Staff doors still opened with the temporary access protocols Caroline remembered. Graham used his remaining authority only to delay security long enough for Daniel and Elliot to reach the board level. Inside the conference hall, Marianne stood before directors, lawyers, and cameras. "There she is," Marianne said, "the temporary server who became very ambitious." Caroline walked to the center table and laid down the ivory letter. I'm also the Latin teacher who can explain why your evidence timeline is impossible. Marianne smiled. Then teach us. Caroline did. She showed the faint pressure marks beneath Thomas Moreland's handwriting. Another sheet had once rested above the letter while Daniel wrote. She demonstrated his compressed Latin notation, then matched it to the archive request signed 8 days after his official death. Daniel stepped forward with the original environmental assessment, carrying the same notation and corrections. The room shifted. Marianne attacked immediately. A man who faked his death is hardly reliable. That is why we built a chain that does not depend on his word, Caroline answered. She linked the monitoring payments, the untouched valuables in her apartment, the surveillance predating Graham's order, and the dormant trust, activated minutes after publication. Marianne's face tightened. Still, she had one defense. Documents prove contamination, she said. They do not prove I controlled enforcement. Caroline looked at Graham. He understood. He could save what remained of his organization by staying silent. Instead, he opened the ledgers. These prove it, he said. The records connected private security, waterfront routes, intimidation payments, and corporate directives directly to Marianne's network. They also implicated Graham's own organization. Marianne stared at him. You would destroy your inheritance for her. Graham looked at Caroline before answering. No, I'm destroying what should never have survived. The midnight transfer was halted. Investigators seized the records. Marianne's counsel stopped speaking. Cameras caught everything. Graham lost his company control, protected routes, political cover, and syndicate immunity in less than 10 minutes. When authorities began clearing the room, he stood alone. No guards, no empire. Caroline could have walked away. He did not ask her to stay, so she crossed the room on her own. You don't owe me a future, Graham told Caroline after she signed the permanent teaching contract she had earned without him. 3 weeks after Harbor Crown, the meaning of those words had begun when she crossed the room toward him and found nothing left between them except choice. By sunrise, Marianne Holt was under federal investigation. Moreland Maritime had entered supervised restructuring, and the Tacoma files were in protected custody. Graham surrendered company control, disclosed the waterfront routes in his ledgers, and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, reviewing his own organization. Consequences don't disappear because I finally did the right thing, he told Caroline. She believed him because he kept proving it. Daniel returned carefully. Caroline met him in a quiet cafe instead of letting reporters turn their reunion into a spectacle. She hugged him, cried, then became angry enough to leave before dessert. 2 days later, she called him herself. I love you, she said. That doesn't return the years. I know. For once, nobody asked her to forgive faster than she could. Her classroom became ordinary again. Students complained about homework. Jessie celebrated when the district converted Caroline's provisional position into a permanent one based on her evaluations, student results, and department recommendation. Graham had never contacted the school. That mattered. Outside the administration building, Caroline held the contract against her chest, while Graham waited beside the curb without guards or an offer disguised as a solution. You have your career, he said, your home, your father. If you decide how much room he gets, you don't need anything from me. That sounds suspiciously like a breakup. A smile touched his mouth. It's an exit. He offered no mansion, ring, title, or promise to make her life easier. He simply gave her the thing his old self feared most, room to refuse him. Caroline studied the man who had once offered $1 million because he believed money could settle every imbalance. Then she reached for his hand. I don't owe you a future. No, I want one anyway. Graham's fingers closed around hers only after she moved first. This time, the choice was freely and entirely hers. Graham set 2 coffees beside Caroline's lesson plans and asked, "Where do you want the tables tonight?" A year had passed, and the ivory letter now rested behind glass in her classroom display, on translation, power, and responsibility. Caroline taught Latin and humanities. Graham asked before changing anything that touched her work. "The long tables by the windows," she said. "Leave the ones for tutoring." He nodded and started moving chairs. Students drifted in for the evening program, arguing about the sentence that had once changed both their lives. One boy pointed at Graham and announced that his Latin pronunciation was terrible. Caroline laughed. "He's improving." "I object to that assessment," Graham said. "You may appeal after class." He looked at her, amused, then waited. Caroline pointed to the troublesome word on the board. Again, Graham tried it. Wrong. The students groaned. Caroline smiled and made him try once more. Caroline's journey was never about becoming worthy of love. She began the story intelligent, capable, and committed to her work. What changed was her willingness to let connection exist without surrendering herself. Graham's transformation was equally demanding. He learned that protection without consent is control wearing a kinder face, and that trust cannot survive when one person decides for both. Their relationship works because autonomy remains intact inside partnership. That idea reaches beyond romance, in families, friendships, and work. Love can become damaging when care turns into permission to overrule another person's choices. Real trust makes room for disagreement, truth, consequences, and the freedom to say no. Which moment in Caroline and Graham's relationship convinced you that they had finally become partners? If you enjoyed their story, share your favorite scene in the comments, subscribe for more Mafia boss romance stories, and join us for the next unforgettable love story. End of script. Sweet dreams.